The forest outside my cabin was quieter than usual that night, the kind of silence that makes your skin prickle. I'd been reading by the dim light of a lantern when the wind shifted and carried a low, guttural sound through the cracks of the old wooden walls. At first, I told myself it was a branch scraping against the siding. But then it came again, a deep, labored breath, followed by a faint scratching at the door. My hand froze halfway to the coffee mug. No one came this far into the woods after dark. My nearest neighbor lived nearly 2 miles away, and even the deer kept their distance once the sun dropped. The scratching grew louder. I could almost hear claws dragging across the old boards. I reached for the flashlight hanging by the door, its cold metal biting against my palm. My heart thumped like it was trying to punch through my ribs. Maybe it was a raccoon or a coyote that had caught the scent of food. Still, something in the air felt wrong. Too heavy, too alive. I unlatched the door slowly. The hinges groaned. The beam of light cut through the darkness, and for a second I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But then I saw it. A large gray wolf collapsed against the porch. One of its forelegs twisted at an unnatural angle, blood seeping into the snow. Its fur shimmered under the flashlight like smoke, every breath a shudder. I should have slammed the door. Every instinct told me to. But then it lifted its head and looked at me. Those eyes, golden, clouded with pain, yet startlingly clear, locked onto mine. There was no snarl, no growl, just a raw, silent plea. For a moment, the world around me disappeared. I wasn't looking at a predator. I was looking at something that wanted to live. I whispered without thinking, almost afraid my voice might break the moment. "Easy there, buddy. Stay still." It blinked, slow and deliberate, like it understood. I grabbed an old towel, a strip of flannel, and the small med kit I kept for hiking injuries. Every step toward the wolf felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. When I got close enough, I could smell the copper tang of blood mixed with damp fur. The wolf's body tensed, lips twitching, but it didn't attack. I crouched, my hands trembling, and wrapped the towel around the leg just above the wound. The bleeding slowed a little. I used a bit of duct tape to hold it in place. Crude, but better than nothing. It whimpered, a low, broken sound, and my chest tightened. I dragged an old blanket from inside, laid it near the porch railing, and coaxed the animal onto it. It followed with an unsteady shuffle, then lowered itself with a long exhale. I placed a bowl of water within reach. It sniffed, then lapped weakly. I stayed with it for a while, sitting on the steps, flashlight dimmed, watching its breathing even out. The snow kept falling, muffling every sound but the slow rhythm of life in front of me. Somewhere deep inside, the fear was still there, but so was something else, a strange pull, a quiet sense of duty. By the time exhaustion took over, the night was almost gone. I left the door cracked, just enough to hear if it stirred. Sleep came in fragments, restless and light. When dawn crept in through the frosted window, the first thing I did was check the porch. The wolf was gone. My stomach dropped until I saw movement by the tree line. It was standing there, legs stiff but steady, staring straight at me. Then it turned toward the forest, took a few limping steps, and stopped. It looked back over its shoulder, waiting. Something deep in me understood. This wasn't over yet. For a long moment, I just stood in the doorway, bare feet on the cold floor, watching that gray shape by the tree line. The wolf's injured leg was stiff, every step a careful calculation, yet he held himself tall. The morning light turned his fur into a washed-out blur against the snow. He looked at me again, then at the woods behind him, then back at me. I could have shut the door and pretended it was over. I had done my part, patched him up as best I could, given water, survived the night. That was more than most people would have done. But the knot in my chest tightened instead of loosening. Something in that stare from the trees felt unfinished, like a sentence that cut off in the middle. "All right," I muttered to myself, more than to him. "Let us see where this goes." I grabbed my old hiking backpack from the hook by the stove. Habit took over. I stuffed in the small first aid kit, a couple of bandages, a roll of gauze, antiseptic spray. I added a half-full bottle of water, a thermos of coffee, a couple of sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, and a coil of thin rope I sometimes use for hanging food in bear country. On a last-second impulse, I tossed in a pair of work gloves. I had no clear idea what I was going to do, but empty hands had never helped much in the woods. I pulled on boots, shrugged into my jacket, and stepped out onto the porch. The air bit at my cheeks, sharp and clean. The wolf did not move as I approached the edge of the yard. He simply watched, head slightly tilted, as if waiting to see whether I would really follow through. "Lead the way," I said quietly. He turned without a sound and limped toward the trees. His gait was uneven but purposeful. I fell in behind him, leaving the safety of the clearing and stepping onto the narrow trail that wound between the pines. The snow there was thinner, broken by old footprints and the tracks of deer. Every crunch of my boots seemed too loud. We moved deeper into the forest. The cabin vanished behind the trunks, swallowed by branches heavy with frost. The trail narrowed, then split around a fallen tree, its roots torn from the ground like frozen claws. The wolf slipped under one of the thicker branches with practiced ease. I had to climb over, my backpack snagging on bark, breath puffing in short white bursts. Every few dozen yards he glanced back, eyes flicking to check my distance. If I slowed, he slowed. If I stumbled on a hidden route, he paused until I caught up. That simple fact did not make any sense, and yet it was happening, step after step. The part of my brain that liked logic kept protesting. The rest of me focused on not losing him. Time stretched. The light shifted from pale gray to something closer today, filtered through the lattice of branches. We crossed a narrow stream, water running slow under a thin shell of ice. The wolf hopped over with a small grunt, favoring his wounded leg. I chose a spot where stones broke the surface and tested each one before committing my weight. My socks were still dry on the other side, but only just. What am I doing? I kept thinking. Following a wild, injured predator into the middle of nowhere. No one knows I am out here. If something goes wrong, it is game over. Yet with every step I took, turning back felt less possible. That look in his eyes from the night before kept replaying in my head, heavier than fear. The land began to change. The neat line of the informal trail gave way to rougher ground. Shrubs choked the spaces between trees. Old stumps jutted up like broken teeth. Patches of snow were stained, here and there, with something darker. At first I thought it might be mud, the damp ground bleeding through. Then the smell hit me. Copper, sharp and sour on the cold air. The wolf slowed and finally stopped in a small clearing where the undergrowth had been crushed. The snow was churned up, pressed flat in places, gouged out in others. Dark streaks painted the ground, some fresh, some already turned rusty. Clumps of coarse fur clung to low branches, snagged like bits of gray smoke. My stomach clenched. There had been a fight here. Not the clean kind where animals tested each other and moved on, but something uglier. There was too much blood, too many drag marks. I followed one with my eyes and saw where it ended against a tree, the trunk scratched and stained. The wolf stood at the edge of it all, chest rising and falling. His ears were forward, body taut, but he did not go closer. It felt like he was letting me take it in, letting me see what he had tried to show with that stare on my porch. Then I saw the first trap. It lay half buried under the snow near a clump of dead grass, the metal jaws smeared with red. Someone had tried to hide it with a few branches, as if the forest itself should help conceal the cruelty. A few feet away, the torn remains of a rabbit lay twisted on its side, fur matted and stiff. One hind leg ended in a shredded mess. A cold anger flared up under my ribs. I knew this kind of device. Illegal in most of the state. The kind you only said if you did not care what you caught or how much it suffered. I crouched, keeping my distance, scanning the ground. There were more prints here now that I was looking for them. Human boot tracks, stamped deep beside lighter animal trails. They circled the clearing, leading in and out, like someone had come back more than once to check their work. "You have got to be kidding me," I breathed. The wolf shifted his weight and let out a low sound, halfway between a growl and a whine. His gaze slid past me, toward a tangle of brush at the far end of the clearing, where the trees pressed closer together. I followed his stare. At first I did not see anything but branches and shadow. Then something in the thicket moved, a tiny twitch, barely there. The air carried a faint, choked sound that did not match the wind or any bird I knew. A thin, broken whimper. My chest went tight. I stepped carefully around the blood-stained snow, eyes locked on the bushes. The closer I got, the clearer the sound became. It was not loud. If the wolf had not brought me, I would never have heard it over the sigh of the trees. I pushed aside a low branch with my gloved hand. There, wedged between the roots and the twisted stems, was a small bundle of gray and brown fur. Too big to be a rabbit, too clumsy to be anything but very young. A narrow metal snare bit deep into one thin leg, the wire cutting almost to the bone. Two wide eyes stared back at me, glazed with fear and pain. It was a wolf pup. The whimper came again, raw and desperate, and for a heartbeat I forgot about the cold, the traps, and the danger of the adult only yards behind me. All I could think about was that small, trembling body caught in steel. For a moment I froze, my knees half bent, my breath turning to small clouds in the cold air. The sound from the brush was thin and shaky, somewhere between a cry and a wheeze. The adult wolf stood a few yards behind me, body stiff, head low, eyes locked on the tangled branches ahead. Whatever was there mattered to it more than I did. I pushed a gloved hand into the shrubs, moving the snow aside. Thorns scraped against my sleeve. The smell hit me first, sharp and metallic. Then I saw it. A small gray body lay twisted near the base of a sapling. A wire snare bit deep into a skinny hind leg, the metal almost buried in fur and flesh. The pup's sides rose and fell too fast. Its eyes were wide and glassy, catching fragments of light that slipped through the branches. My stomach clenched. This was not an accident. Someone had put the wire here on purpose. Easy, I muttered under my breath as much to myself as to the pup. We are going to get you out of this. I slid my backpack off and dug through it with numb fingers. Pocket knife. Small folding pliers. A roll of bandage from the same kit I had used on the adult. I laid everything out on the snow, aware of the low rumble coming from behind me. When I glanced back, the grown wolf had crept closer, hackles slightly raised, lips parted just enough to show teeth. I lifted my hand slowly, showing the tools, keeping my voice level. I am helping, not hurting. Stay with me. The wolf did not understand the words, but something in my tone must have reached it. The growl faded to a tense silence. It stayed where it was, eyes darting between my hands and the pup. The snare was wrapped tight around the sapling and hooked into the ground by a short metal stake. I had to work carefully, sawing through snow and frozen dirt before I could reach the main wire. Every small movement made the pup jerk and whine. Each sound hit me like a stone. I loosened the wire around the branch first, easing the tension a little. Blood had soaked into the snow around the leg, staining it a dull brown. I slipped the pliers under the loop and twisted, trying not to let the metal bite deeper. The pup's jaw clenched. Its head dropped, then lifted again in a weak attempt to move away. Almost there, I whispered, hands shaking from cold and nerves. Just a little more. The last strand snapped with a sudden jerk. The wire recoiled and cut across my glove, leaving a thin line in the fabric. The pup's leg flopped free, but it didn't try to stand. It just lay there, panting, eyes half closed. I peeled the wire off as gently as I could and tossed it aside. The leg looked bad, swollen, raw, fur matted with blood. I wrapped the bandage loosely, more to keep it warm and covered than anything. I knew I was not a vet. I was just buying time. When I finally backed out of the brush, I almost tripped over another shape in the snow. For a split second my heart stopped, but it was only another pup, smaller, curled against the trunk of a fallen tree. It watched me with dull eyes, chest moving shallowly. A third little body lay beside it, completely still. I sank to my knees. 3 snares. 3 pups. One already gone. The adult wolf circled to the side, not coming too close, nose working the air around the motionless body. It let out a sound that was not quite a howl, not quite a growl. Something heavy twisted inside my chest. I looked around more carefully and saw more wires glinting in the undergrowth, half buried in snow. They ran along an invisible line, spaced with cruel precision. This was not some old forgotten trap. Someone had built a system here, a row of silent, waiting nooses. Bits of memory flashed through my head. Travis complaining on my porch about predators cutting into deer numbers. Jokes in town about taking matters into their own hands. Offhand comments about how nobody from the city was going to tell them what to do in their own woods. I realized then that this place had probably been like this for a while. Animals had been dying here long before I stumbled into it. I checked the second pup. It tried to shift closer when I touched it, pressing its small body against my glove as if searching for warmth. There was no snare on this one, just a limpness in its back legs that made my throat tighten. You cannot fix all of them, I told myself. You are one person out here with a pocket knife and bandages. But I also knew I could not just walk away. I studied each pup, weighing my choices in seconds that felt like hours. The one I had freed from the snare was in the worst shape, but still held on to some fight. The one pressed against the fallen tree was weak, breathing unevenly, but very much alive. The dead one lay between them like a warning of what would happen if I hesitated too long. I turned to the adult wolf. It watched me without blinking. "I am taking one," I said quietly, voice cracking in the empty air. "I will bring it back if I can. I will come back here. I promise." It was a ridiculous promise to make to a wild animal, but I had to say it. I slid my arms under the weaker pup by the tree. It let out a thin sound, but did not struggle. I pulled it against my chest, tucking it inside my jacket as much as the bulk of my clothes allowed. Its fur was cold and damp through the fabric. The other injured pup I nudged closer to the adult, keeping my movements slow. The wolf stepped in, placing its body between me and the two small shapes on the ground. Its gaze never left my face. We stood like that for a few long heartbeats. Then it gave a short, sharp huff and turned its head away, as if dismissing me. I took that as permission, or at least not a refusal. I grabbed my backpack, slung it over one shoulder, and started back along the narrow path we had used. The weight inside my jacket was light but constant, a small, fragile reminder of what I was choosing to carry. The woods felt different on the way out. Every tree seemed closer. Branches scraped my arms as if trying to push me back. I moved as fast as I dared, careful not to jostle the pup more than necessary. At a bend in the trail, I stopped so abruptly that the world seemed to tilt. There, cutting across the faint tracks I had made earlier with the wolf, was a larger, sharper set of prints. Deep, clean edges, the pattern of thick soles pressed into the snow. Someone in heavy boots had walked this way after us. The tracks were fresh. The snow inside them had not yet started to crust over. They led straight toward the line of snares we had just left behind. The sky had turned the color of steel by the time I made it back to the cabin. The pup inside my jacket barely moved. Each breath against my chest felt weaker than the one before. I laid it down by the stove, hands shaking so hard I almost dropped the kettle when I poured warm water into a bowl. "Come on, little one, stay with me," I murmured. Its tiny paw twitched, a faint response. I wrapped it in an old flannel shirt, added a folded blanket for warmth, and held my hand above its muzzle to feel the air move. Still breathing. Outside, the light faded fast. I shut the curtains, fed more wood into the stove, and sat on the floor, trying to think. Somewhere out there, a wolf was standing guard over two more pups, and I had no idea how long they could last. My mind kept circling the same questions. Who set those traps? How many were there? How long had it been happening right under my nose? A crunch of snow outside made me freeze. Then came the sound of boots on the porch. I stood, heart pounding, as a familiar voice called from behind the door. "Aaron, you in there?" It was Travis, my nearest neighbor. I hesitated before opening the door. He stepped inside without waiting for an answer, brushing snow from his jacket. He sniffed the air. "Smells like something died in here," he said, forcing a laugh. "What you got there?" "Just an injured animal," I replied carefully. "Found it in the woods." Travis squinted toward the stove and spotted the bundle. His brow furrowed. "That a pup?" "Yeah, wolf pup." His mouth twisted into something between a smirk and a grimace. "Well, ain't that just perfect? You know, you're asking for trouble keeping one of those around. They'll bring the whole pack down on you." I bit back a sharp response. "It's hurt. I couldn't just leave it." He shrugged. "You do what you want, man. But don't come crying when they start killing deer or tearing up your yard. There's a reason some of us take care of that problem before it spreads." I stepped closer, heat rising under my skin. "So you're saying those traps out there are yours?" He looked at me, eyes narrowing. "Traps? What traps?" "The ones with wire snares. The ones tearing up the legs of pups and killing them slow." He exhaled through his nose, gaze shifting toward the window. "Look, you don't know what you saw. Wolves breed fast. Too many of them, and you won't see a single deer come winter. It's not pretty, but it's how things work out here." I wanted to shout. Instead, my voice came out low, steady. "That's not how it works, Travis. That's cruelty." He gave a humorless chuckle. "You're new enough to still think the woods play fair. Just wait till something goes after your dog food or the chicken coop you'll build someday. You'll change your mind." Before I could answer, he opened the door again. "Suit yourself. But if that wolf comes looking for you, don't expect me to come running." The door shut behind him, leaving only the hiss of the fire and the faint sound of the pup's uneven breathing. I sat back down and ran a hand through my hair, shaking from anger more than cold. I couldn't let it go. Not this time. I pulled my phone from the counter and searched for the number I'd seen pinned to the bulletin board at the ranger station, wildlife emergency. My thumb hovered for a second, then I pressed call. The voice that answered was calm, clipped, professional. "This is Ranger Caleb Walker. What's the issue?" I told him everything. The wounded adult wolf, the snares, the pups, the tracks of heavy boots. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a pause. "Then, you did the right thing calling. Those traps are illegal. I can be there by morning. Don't go back out tonight, understood?" "Understood." After hanging up, I moved closer to the stove. The pup stirred, opening its eyes for a second, pupils dull but focused. I gave it a small sip of water from a spoon. It swallowed weakly and pressed its head against the fabric. "You're going to make it," I said quietly, even though I wasn't sure. Night fell hard. The forest outside seemed to hold its breath. I tried to rest in the chair, but every creak of wood made me sit up again. Around midnight, the wind died completely. Then, cutting through the stillness, came a sound that made my skin crawl. A howl, long, raw, full of something deeper than pain. It wasn't the steady call of a pack. It was broken, ragged, as if the voice itself was tearing apart. It rose once, fell, and then rose again, closer. The pup beside the stove whimpered in its sleep. I stared at the door, every nerve in my body strung tight. Out there, in the dark beyond the trees, something was calling for what it had lost. Caleb arrived at sunrise, his truck crunching over the frozen ground. A younger ranger followed with a camera and heavy pack. They came inside, eyes landing on the small bundle by my stove, the wolf pup breathing faintly under a flannel. Caleb examined the leg. "You did good," he said. "We'll get it to rehab after we clean up the site." We packed quickly. Caleb carried bolt cutters, Mason the camera. I led them through the pale morning forest, retracing the trail. The snow was already filling my old footprints. When we reached the clearing, the truth looked worse in daylight. Blood, flattened grass, a lifeless pup. Mason photographed everything while Caleb cut through the wire snares. "Whoever set these knew exactly what they were doing," he muttered. As the clink of metal echoed, movement caught my eye. The adult wolf stood at the edge of the clearing, injured legs stiff, but eyes sharp. It didn't growl, only watched us. Caleb nodded softly. "Let's show it we're cleaning up, not adding to the harm." When the last snare was cut, the wolf turned and disappeared between the trees. On the way back, we found a truck parked near the road. Travis leaned against it, arms folded. "Morning," he said. Caleb's badge flashed. "We found illegal traps. You know anything about that?" Travis's voice stayed flat. "Too many wolves this year. People protect what's theirs." "Someone killed pups," I said. "That's not protection." He glared. "You think you speak for the woods now?" "No," I said. "Just not pretending anymore." Travis's jaw tightened. He muttered that he'd seen nothing and drove off. Caleb sighed. They always know more than they admit. Back at the cabin, we lifted the pup into a crate. It growled weakly when Caleb picked it up. "Good sign," he said. "Still has fight. Will it come back?" I asked. "Maybe," he said. "But the forest will be safer either way." They left with the pup and the bag of cut wire. When the sound of the truck faded, the silence felt lighter. Weeks passed. Snow melted. Streams whispered through the forest. One evening, I walked to the clearing again. The grass had grown back, only faint stains marking what once was. At the tree line, the adult wolf stood watching me, its leg healed. Beside it were 3 lanky pups. One sniffed the air, curious. I stayed still. Our eyes met across the clearing. No fear, no hostility, just quiet understanding. For a moment, I felt the forest breathe with me. Then the wolf turned, leading the pups away into the trees. I stayed until the last sound faded, knowing the woods weren't just a backdrop anymore. They were alive, and, for the first time, I felt part of them.